Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The sound of a baby crying pierced the silence of the night, echoing through the dimly lit room. Amina cradled her newborn daughter, Zara, against her chest, her hands trembling as she tried to calm the baby. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered, casting shadows on the peeling walls of the tiny apartment. She could hear Kofi's heavy footsteps approaching, each step laced with frustration. The door swung open with a force that made her flinch. Kofi stood there, his tall frame filling the doorway. His face was a mask of anger, his eyes bloodshot from a mixture of alcohol and sleepless nights. "Is this how it's going to be every night?" he bellowed, slamming the door shut behind him. "I work all day, and I can't even get peace in my own house?" Amina's voice was barely above a whisper. "She's just a baby, Kofi. She's hungry. I'm trying to feed her." Kofi scoffed, running a hand over his unkempt hair. "Feed her? You mean this is what I get after all my sacrifices? A daughter? Do you know what my family will say? A man's first child is supposed to be a son." The words cut through Amina like a blade. She had endured Kofi's outbursts before, but this was different. She felt the sting of his disappointment not just for herself but for Zara, who was blameless in all of this. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Kofi," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her, "Zara is our child. She's a blessing, no matter what gender she is. You should be proud to be her father." Kofi sneered. "Proud? Proud of a wife who can't even give me a son? You've brought shame to this house, Amina. My mother was right about you." Amina's heart sank. She had always tried to win the approval of Kofi's mother, a woman steeped in tradition and fiercely protective of her son. But no matter what Amina did, it was never enough. "I've done everything for this family," Amina said, her voice breaking. "I've supported you through your struggles, cooked, cleaned, and now I'm raising our child. And this is how you repay me?" Kofi's face hardened. "You think you're some kind of saint? If you're so perfect, then go. Take your child and leave. I don't need you here." The words hung in the air, suffocating Amina. She stared at him, hoping he would take them back, but his expression was unyielding. Her chest tightened as she realized he meant it. Zara let out another cry, her tiny fists flailing. Amina instinctively held her closer, shielding her from the storm brewing in the room. "I'll leave," Amina said finally, her voice barely audible. "But don't think for a second that this is the end. You'll regret this, Kofi." She turned away, her mind racing. There was no time to waste. She gathered a few essentials, a blanket for Zara, some clothes, and a little money she had saved from her sewing work. She avoided looking at Kofi as she packed, afraid that one glance would shatter her resolve. The night air was cold as Amina stepped out of the apartment, Zara nestled against her chest. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual hum of city life reduced to the occasional bark of a stray dog or the distant rumble of a passing car. Amina clutched Zara tighter, her tears finally spilling as she walked aimlessly. She thought of her family back in the village, her grandmother Adissa's warm embrace, and the wisdom she had often dismissed as old-fashioned. Perhaps it was time to go back. But how could she return with nothing to show for her years of marriage? The shame weighed heavily on her, but her determination to protect Zara pushed her forward. As she walked, the memories of happier times with Kofi flooded her mind. Their courtship, his promises of a bright future, and the way he used to look at her with pride. She wondered what had changed. Was it the pressure from his family? The struggles of city life? Or had he simply never been the man she thought he was? Lost in thought, she nearly stumbled over a pothole. Amina stopped, taking a deep breath. She needed to focus. She looked down at Zara, whose cries had quieted, her tiny face peaceful in the moonlight. A wave of resolve washed over her. She would not let this be their story, a tale of abandonment and despair. "Zara," she whispered, her voice firm despite the tears. "We'll make it. I promise you." She straightened her shoulders and began walking toward the bus station, her destination clear in her mind. The village might have been a place she once wanted to leave, but now it was her sanctuary, a place where she could start anew. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Amina boarded a rickety bus, her heart heavy but her spirit unbroken. She held Zara close, whispering prayers for strength and guidance. She didn't know what awaited her in the village, but she knew one thing for certain: she would fight for her daughter's future, no matter what it took. Back in the apartment, Kofi sat alone, the silence deafening. He stared at the empty crib in the corner of the room, a pang of something unfamiliar, perhaps regret, gnawing at him. But his pride wouldn't let him admit it, not yet. He poured himself another drink, convincing himself that he had done the right thing. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. And as the days passed, that seed would grow, forcing Kofi to confront the consequences of his actions in ways he could never have anticipated. The bus rattled along the dusty road as dawn broke over the horizon. Amina sat in the corner seat, clutching Zara tightly against her chest. The baby had finally fallen asleep, her tiny breaths soft and steady. Amina's body ached from exhaustion, but her mind raced with thoughts of the future. The village loomed ahead, shrouded in mist. It had been years since Amina had last seen it. She had left with dreams of a brighter future, believing the city held the answers to her ambitions. Now, she was returning, her heart heavy with the weight of failure. As the bus rolled to a stop at the edge of the village, Amina stepped out and inhaled deeply. The air was different here, clean and laced with the earthy scent of damp soil and morning dew. She adjusted the cloth on her back that held Zara snugly and began the walk toward her grandmother's house. The return to the village. Grandmother Adissa's compound was just as Amina remembered it, a modest mud-brick house surrounded by a small garden filled with medicinal herbs and vibrant flowers. Adissa was known throughout the village for her wisdom and her skill in traditional medicine. Many came to her seeking cures, advice, or simply a listening ear. When Amina reached the gate, her grandmother was already there, as though she had sensed her arrival. Adissa stood with her arms crossed, her wrinkled face etched with concern. But as her eyes fell on Amina and the baby, her expression softened. "My child," Adissa said, opening her arms wide. "Welcome home." The warmth in her voice broke something inside Amina, and she collapsed into her grandmother's embrace, tears streaming down her face. Adissa held her tightly, whispering soothing words as Zara stirred, letting out a small whimper. "Come inside," Adissa said, guiding them into the house. "You're safe now." Finding solace. The house was simple but comforting. Amina laid Zara down on a mat, the baby cooing softly in her sleep. Adissa brought a bowl of warm water and a cloth to help Amina clean herself up. As she worked, she asked gently, "What happened, Amina? Why are you here?" Amina hesitated, ashamed to admit the truth. But under her grandmother's steady gaze, she found the courage to speak. She recounted everything: Kofi's anger, his rejection, and her decision to leave. Adissa listened without interruption, her face betraying no judgment. When Amina finished, Adissa nodded thoughtfully. "You've been through a storm, my child. But storms pass and the sun always returns. You're stronger than you think." Adissa's words planted a small seed of hope in Amina's heart. Over the next few days, she began to settle into the rhythm of village life. The simplicity of it was a stark contrast to the chaos of the city. Neighbors came by to greet her, some offering food and clothing for Zara, others sharing stories to lift her spirits. Building a new life. Adissa introduced Amina to her work with herbal remedies. They spent hours in the garden, harvesting leaves, roots, and flowers, each with its own purpose. Adissa explained their uses with patience and care, her voice steady and reassuring. "You have a gift, Amina," Adissa said one afternoon as they prepared a batch of balm for aching joints. "Your hands are steady, and your mind is sharp. With time, you could make this your livelihood." Amina wasn't sure at first. She had never considered traditional medicine as a path for herself. But as the days turned into weeks, she found solace in the work. The act of creating something useful, something that could help others, gave her a sense of purpose. Her first breakthrough came when a neighbor's child fell ill with a fever. Adissa was away, so Amina stepped in, preparing a remedy based on what she had learned. When the child recovered, word spread quickly through the village. People began to seek her out, and Amina realized she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. Zara's symbol of hope. Zara grew healthier and more vibrant with each passing day. Her giggles filled the house, bringing joy to everyone who heard them. For Amina, Zara was both her greatest challenge and her greatest blessing. Every time she looked at her daughter, she was reminded of why she had to keep going. One evening, as the sun set over the village, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Amina sat on the veranda with Zara in her lap. Adissa joined her, a steaming cup of herbal tea in her hands. "You've done well, Amina," Adissa said, her voice filled with pride. "I see the fire in you. The city may have tested you, but it didn't break you." Amina smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. "I wouldn't have made it without you, grandmother. Thank you for taking us in." Adissa reached over and placed a hand on Amina's. "Family is everything, my child. And now, you're part of this community again. Never forget that." A shadow from the past. While Amina was finding her footing in the village, Kofi's life in the city was unraveling. His pride had kept him from admitting his mistakes, but the absence of Amina and Zara weighed heavily on him. His mother's scolding, the judgment of neighbors, and his own guilt began to eat away at his confidence. One night, sitting alone in the dim light of his apartment, Kofi picked up his phone and scrolled through old photos of Amina and Zara. The sight of their smiles made his chest tighten. For the first time, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Meanwhile, back in the village, Amina remained unaware of Kofi's struggles. Her focus was on building a future for herself and Zara. She had no room for regret or bitterness. She was determined to create a life where her daughter would never feel unwanted or unloved. The days in the village unfolded steadily, marked by the rhythm of work, laughter, and a growing sense of purpose for Amina. With each passing moment, she felt herself becoming stronger, more resolute in her decision to leave the life she had once shared with Kofi. Her small business of herbal remedies flourished, and her daughter, Zara, grew healthier and more vibrant under her care. Yet, in the bustling city far away, Kofi's world was falling apart. Amina's flourishing life. Amina's days were filled with activity. She would rise early, carrying Zara on her back as she worked in her grandmother's herb garden. Under Adissa's guidance, she learned to identify plants, mix potions, and create remedies that eased everything from stomachaches to sleepless nights. Her grandmother's teachings went beyond herbs. She imparted wisdom about resilience, community, and the strength that women carried in silence. The village began to take notice of Amina's work. Soon, people came to her not only for her remedies but also for her advice. Her confidence grew with every grateful smile and word of thanks. One day, as Amina sat in the small marketplace selling her wares, a woman approached her, holding a sickly child. The boy's cheeks were sunken, and his eyes dull with fever. The woman, her voice shaking, pleaded, "Please, Amina, help my son. The hospital is too far, and I don't have enough money." Amina carefully examined the boy and prepared a remedy using herbs she had on hand. She explained the dosage to the mother and reassured her. Days later, the woman returned with her son, his cheeks rosy and his laughter bright. She knelt before Amina, her gratitude spilling over in words and tears. From that moment, Amina became a symbol of hope for many in the village. As her reputation grew, so did her earnings. Amina began to save money, dreaming of building a better future for Zara. She bought her first sewing machine and resumed tailoring in her spare time. Life was far from easy, but for the first time in years, Amina felt like she was in control of her destiny. Kofi's descent. In the city, Kofi's life was unraveling. The once proud man who had chased his wife and newborn daughter out of his home was now a shadow of himself. His job as a sales manager had always been tenuous, and his erratic behavior, fueled by pride and anger, had alienated his colleagues and supervisors. When a new manager was hired, Kofi was unceremoniously demoted, a blow to his already fragile ego. The financial strain began to mount. Without Amina's quiet efficiency in managing their household, bills piled up. Kofi turned to his friends for support, but their patience quickly wore thin. His drinking increased, and his nights were often spent in bars, drowning his regret in alcohol. At home, the silence was deafening. The crib where Zara had once slept remained untouched, a stark reminder of the family he had driven away. Kofi found himself scrolling through his phone, looking at pictures of Amina and Zara. He lingered on a video of Zara laughing, her chubby cheeks dimpled with joy. The sound tore at him, filling him with a sense of loss he couldn't name. His mother, who had once been his fiercest defender, now voiced her disapproval openly. "You're a fool, Kofi," she said one evening as she stood in his cluttered apartment. "You let your pride destroy your family. Amina was a good woman, and Zara is your blood. What do you have now?" Kofi had no answer. For the first time, he began to wonder if his mother was right. He had chased away the very people who had given his life meaning. News travels back. One evening, as Amina sat with her grandmother weaving baskets, a neighbor arrived with news from the city. "Your husband, Kofi," the man began hesitantly, "he's not doing well. He's lost his job, and I heard his landlord is threatening to evict him." Amina stiffened. Though she no longer harbored the same pain she had felt when she left, the mention of Kofi stirred complicated emotions. Zara, now a lively toddler, toddled over to her, clutching a wooden toy. Amina scooped her up, holding her close as she processed the news. Adissa watched her granddaughter carefully. "What will you do?" she asked after the neighbor had left. Amina shook her head. "I don't know, grandmother. I've built a life here for Zara and me. Kofi made his choices. He didn't want us then, why should I care what happens to him now?" Adissa placed a hand on Amina's shoulder. "It's not about him, my child. It's about you. Carrying anger or guilt will only weigh you down. Whatever you decide, make sure it brings you peace." Kofi's realization. As Kofi's situation worsened, he found himself thinking more and more about Amina. He realized how much he had taken her for granted. She had been the glue that held their home together, and without her, his life had fallen apart. One night, after a particularly harsh argument with his landlord, Kofi sat in the darkness of his apartment and broke down. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered Amina's name. For the first time, he allowed himself to confront the enormity of his mistakes. He decided he had to find her, to beg for her forgiveness. But deep down, he knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. He had to change, to become the man she and Zara deserved. The parallel paths. In the village, Amina continued to thrive, her strength and independence inspiring those around her. She became a mentor to other women, teaching them skills to support themselves. Her connection to the land, to the herbs, and to her community deepened, grounding her in a way the city never had. At the same time, Kofi began his journey of self-reflection. He sought out counseling through a community center, determined to address the anger and insecurities that had driven him to push his family away. He started saving money, working odd jobs to pay off his debts. Each step was painful, but he persisted, driven by the hope of making amends. Amina's inner conflict. One evening, as Zara played with the other children in the compound, Amina sat with Adissa under the stars. "Do you think people can change?" she asked her grandmother. Adissa smiled gently. "People can change, but only if they want to. And change takes time. The question is, Amina, what do you want? What will make you and Zara happy?" Amina didn't answer immediately. She looked at her daughter, her heart swelling with love. She wanted a life where Zara felt safe, loved, and supported. But could Kofi ever be part of that life? As the chapter ended, two paths were slowly converging. Amina was flourishing in her new life, but echoes of her past lingered. Kofi, humbled and broken, was on a journey of redemption. The question that loomed was whether their paths would meet again, and if so, what would become of the two souls bound by love, regret, and the hope of a second chance. The journey back to the village was long and grueling, but Kofi welcomed the discomfort. Each mile covered was a reminder of the mistakes he had made, of the family he had discarded in his pride and anger. He carried nothing but a small bag and a heavy heart, his mind racing with questions. Would Amina forgive him? Could Zara even recognize him as her father? And most pressing of all, did he deserve a second chance? Kofi arrives in the village. The bus stopped at the edge of the village, the same spot where Amina had arrived months earlier. The morning air was crisp, and the scent of wet earth reminded Kofi of his own childhood in a similar village. He looked around, feeling both foreign and familiar with the landscape. As he walked through the dusty paths, villagers glanced at him curiously. News traveled fast in such places, and many recognized him from whispered stories about Amina's past. Some frowned, others merely observed. Kofi kept his head down, his steps faltering as he approached Adissa's compound. The compound was alive with activity. Amina was in the garden, her hands deftly plucking herbs, while Zara toddled around, her laughter ringing out like music. Kofi stopped in his tracks, his heart tightening at the sight. Zara had grown since he had last seen her. She was walking, her tiny feet kicking up dust as she chased a butterfly. She looked happy, carefree, and it struck him deeply. Before he could muster the courage to approach, Adissa appeared from the house. She spotted him immediately, her keen eyes narrowing as she took in his disheveled appearance. Without a word, she walked over to him, her posture firm but not unkind. "So," she said, her voice steady, "you've come back." Kofi nodded, his throat dry. "I've made mistakes, Mama Adissa. I'm here to make things right." Adissa regarded him for a long moment, her gaze searching. Finally, she motioned for him to follow her. "Let's see if Amina is ready to hear what you have to say." The confrontation. Amina looked up from her work as Adissa and Kofi approached. Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in a mixture of anger and disbelief. She stood, wiping her hands on her skirt, and positioned herself protectively in front of Zara, who clung to her leg, staring curiously at the stranger. "What are you doing here, Kofi?" Amina's voice was cold, though it trembled slightly. Kofi swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. "Amina, I came to apologize. I know I hurt you. I was wrong. I let my pride and my fears drive you away, and I've regretted it every day since you left." Amina's lips tightened. "Regret doesn't change what you did. Regret doesn't erase the nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering how I would take care of Zara. It doesn't make up for the fact that you abandoned your family." "I know," Kofi said, his voice breaking. "I know I can't undo the pain I caused. But I want to make things right, for you, for Zara, and for myself. I've been working on myself, Amina. I've learned to face my flaws, to take responsibility. Please, just give me a chance to prove it." Amina turned away, her emotions swirling. Zara tugged at her dress, sensing her mother's distress. Amina scooped her up, holding her close as she took a deep breath. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Kofi," she said finally. "It's not just about me anymore. It's about Zara. She needs stability, love, and someone who won't hurt her the way you hurt me." "I understand," Kofi replied. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I just want to be part of her life, to show you both that I've changed." Elder Ni's mediation. Adissa suggested they seek counsel from Elder Ni, a respected figure in the village known for his wisdom and ability to mediate conflicts. The next day, Amina and Kofi sat before the elder under the shade of a large baobab tree, with Adissa and a few other villagers serving as witnesses. Elder Ni listened intently as both Amina and Kofi shared their perspectives. Amina spoke of the pain and betrayal she had felt, while Kofi admitted to his failings and his desire for redemption. The elder stroked his gray beard thoughtfully before addressing them. "A family is like a tree," he began. "When one branch is broken, the whole tree suffers. But a broken branch can heal if tended to carefully. The question is, do you both have the will to nurture this tree back to health?" Amina was silent, her gaze fixed on Zara, who was playing with a stick in the dirt. Kofi spoke first. "I do, Elder. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back their trust." The elder nodded. "Words are easy, my son. Actions are what matter. You will need to show through your deeds that you have changed." Turning to Amina, he said, "Forgiveness is not weakness, Amina. It is a gift you give yourself as much as the other person. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting or erasing the past. You must decide what is best for you and your child. Building trust. Over the next weeks, Kofi stayed in the village, living in a small hut provided by one of the villagers. He threw himself into community work, helping repair houses, tending to crops, and assisting wherever he was needed. He avoided pressuring Amina, choosing instead to show his transformation through his actions. Zara, curious about the man who now lingered near her home, began to warm up to him. One day, she toddled over to him while he was fixing a fence and handed him a small flower. "For you," she said shyly. Kofi's heart swelled as he accepted the flower. "Thank you, Zara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Amina observed from a distance, her feelings a complicated tangle. She couldn't deny the change she saw in Kofi, but the scars of the past still lingered. Could she truly let him back into their lives? Turning point. One evening, after Zara had fallen asleep, Amina and Kofi sat outside Adissa's house. The night was quiet, the stars bright above them. "I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were," Amina said softly. "Too much has happened." "I don't want to go back," Kofi replied. "I want to move forward. I want us to build something better, even if it takes time." Amina looked at him, searching his face for any trace of the man who had once hurt her. Instead, she saw someone humbled by his mistakes, someone who seemed genuinely committed to change. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to see that this isn't just temporary." Kofi nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." Months passed, and the air in the village grew cooler as the seasons changed. Life moved forward, but with a new rhythm. Kofi had become a quiet but steady presence in the community, earning the respect of the villagers through his hard work and humility. Amina, though cautious, began to see the sincerity in his efforts, and Zara's growing affection for her father added another layer of complexity to her emotions. The village speaks. The villagers, who had initially been skeptical of Kofi, began to notice the transformation in him. He worked tirelessly alongside them, repairing broken fences, helping with harvests, and even volunteering at the local school. One evening, as Amina sat with her grandmother in the courtyard, a neighbor approached with a basket of yams. "That man, your husband," the woman said, setting the basket down, "he's different now. Not like the man we heard about. People are starting to talk good things this time." Amina nodded politely, unsure of how to respond. Inside, she felt the stirrings of something she couldn't yet name. She was still wary of letting Kofi back into her life fully, but she couldn't ignore the changes she saw. Adissa watched her granddaughter closely. "What do you feel, Amina?" she asked after the neighbor left. Amina sighed, gazing at Zara, who was playing nearby with a group of children. "I don't know, grandmother. Part of me wants to forgive him, for Zara's sake. But I'm afraid. What if he goes back to the man he was?" Adissa reached for Amina's hand, her voice soft but firm. "The heart is a fragile thing, my child, but it's also resilient. Forgiveness is a risk, yes, but sometimes it's worth taking, for yourself as much as for others." A symbolic gesture. One morning, Kofi arrived at the compound carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. Amina looked at him warily as he approached her in the garden, where she was sorting herbs. "I made this for Zara," he said, unwrapping the bundle to reveal a handmade toy, a small wooden butterfly painted in bright colors. Amina's breath caught. The butterfly was beautiful, its wings delicately carved and painted with care. Zara ran up, her eyes lighting up as Kofi handed it to her. "For me?" Zara asked, her voice filled with delight. "For you?" Kofi said, crouching to her level. "Because you're my little butterfly." Amina watched the exchange, her heart softening despite herself. She saw the joy in Zara's face, the tenderness in Kofi's eyes, and for a moment, the walls she had built around her heart wavered. A community decision. The villagers, recognizing the tension between Amina and Kofi, decided to intervene in the way they knew best, through a traditional reconciliation ceremony. Elder Ni called for a gathering in the village square, where disputes were often resolved through community dialogue. On the appointed day, Amina, Kofi, and Zara sat before the elders, surrounded by villagers. The atmosphere was solemn but hopeful. Elder Ni began by recounting the story of their struggles, acknowledging the pain both had endured. Amina, he said, addressing her directly, you have shown great strength and resilience. You've built a life for yourself and your daughter, and no one can take that away from you. But do you believe there's a path forward for this family? Amina hesitated, her eyes on Zara, who was sitting in Kofi's lap, clutching the wooden butterfly. Finally, she spoke. I don't know if we can go back to being husband and wife. But I do know that Zara deserves to have both parents in her life, as long as it's a healthy relationship. Elder Ni nodded, then turned to Kofi. And you, Kofi? You've come a long way, but actions speak louder than words. What do you offer this family? Kofi stood, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I offer my commitment to being a better man, a better father. I know I can't undo the past, but I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I've changed. The elder looked between the two of them before addressing the crowd. Rebuilding a family takes time, patience, and the willingness to forgive. The decision lies with Amina, but we, as a community, will support them both. The rebirth. After the ceremony, Amina and Kofi began the slow process of rebuilding trust. They agreed to co-parent Zara, with Kofi taking on more responsibilities in her upbringing. He would walk her to the local school, help with her meals, and spend time playing with her in the evenings. Amina, though still guarded, allowed herself to share small moments with Kofi, discussions about Zara's future, laughter over her antics, and even quiet conversations about their past. Over time, these moments began to stitch together a fragile but growing bond. One day, as they sat under the baobab tree watching Zara chase butterflies, Kofi turned to Amina. I know we have a long way to go, he said, his voice soft. But thank you for giving me this chance. Amina looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she smiled. We'll see where this leads, Kofi. For now, let's focus on what matters, Zara. A celebration of healing. The village decided to celebrate the family's progress with a small festival. It was a joyful affair, filled with music, dancing, and laughter. Amina, dressed in a vibrant Ankara gown, danced with Zara in her arms, while Kofi watched, his heart full. As the night wore on, Adissa approached Kofi. You've done well, my son, she said, her voice warm. But remember, redemption is a journey, not a destination. I understand, Mama Adissa, Kofi replied, bowing his head respectfully. Thank you for guiding Amina when I couldn't. Adissa smiled, patting his shoulder. Just don't forget what brought you here. A new beginning. As the festival drew to a close, Kofi, Amina, and Zara sat together, watching the stars. The air was filled with a sense of renewal, of possibilities yet to come. Though the road ahead was uncertain, they were no longer burdened by the weight of the past. For Amina, the journey had been one of finding her strength and reclaiming her identity. For Kofi, it had been a path of humility and redemption. And for Zara, it was a promise of love and stability, surrounded by a community that cared deeply for her. In the quiet of the night, as Zara dozed off in her father's arms, Amina whispered, "Let's take it one day at a time." Kofi nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. One day at a time. And so, under the vast African sky, their story began anew, a story not of brokenness, but of healing, hope, and the unyielding power of love. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.